I came from Hollywood, and that wasn't Henry's upbringing. And even with Happy Days, even with the broad comedy that we were going for, he was looking for those other values.
For years, Happy Days looked like the perfect set. Smiles, laughter, and a cast that felt more like a family than co-workers. Ron Howard, the young actor who played the beloved soft-spoken Richie Cunningham, was at the center of it all. Viewers saw him as the heart of the show, the calm in the chaos, the one character who never seemed touched by Hollywood drama. But behind the cameras, Ron was living through a secret struggle that no fan ever saw. A battle that forced him to make a choice no rising star should ever have to make. And the moment it happened, everything changed. His decision was so sudden, so shocking, that even his castmates admitted they never saw it coming. It wasn't a contract fight. It wasn't money. It wasn't fame getting to his head. It was something far more personal. Something that pushed Ron to walk away from one of the biggest shows on television at the height of its success. The world thought he had everything, but inside he was breaking. And when the final incident happened, the one thing that crossed a line he couldn't ignore, Ron didn't argue, negotiate, or delay. He simply walked off and didn't return. To this day, fans still ask the same question. What happened on that set that made Ron Howard leave so fast? And why was the truth kept quiet for so many years, hidden beneath contracts, studio pressure, and a Hollywood system that didn't want the public to know what really drove its brightest young star away? The answer is finally coming out, and it's not what anyone expected. Ron Howard wasn't just another actor on Happy Days. He was the original face of the show. Before the leather jacket, before the motorcycle, before the Fonz became a cultural phenomenon, the series was built around Ron's character. Richie Cunningham was the clean-cut kid every parent trusted, the boy next door audiences loved, and the emotional anchor that kept the show grounded. But what most people don't realize is that Ron never planned on staying in that role forever. Even before Happy Days became a hit, he had a dream far bigger than acting. His heart wasn't on the screen. It was behind the camera. Ron wanted to be a director. He had been quietly studying film since he was a teenager, collecting notes, writing ideas, and watching how every scene was constructed. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing storytelling. But Hollywood didn't care about that part of him. They only cared about the character he played. As the show exploded in popularity, the attention shifted. Ron slowly went from being the lead to being the guy quietly pushed into the background. Audiences loved Richie, but the network loved someone else more. Henry Winkler, the actor who played Fonzie. And suddenly, the show built around Richie Cunningham began rewriting itself to spotlight the cooler, funnier, more marketable character. Ron wasn't jealous. He had no problem sharing the screen. What bothered him was the loss of control. He went from being the star of the show to barely being the focus of his own scenes. His storylines became smaller. His character was given fewer emotional arcs, and decisions about the show no longer included him. Still, Ron stayed professional. He didn't complain publicly, didn't argue with producers, didn't cause on-set problems, but the shift was happening and the pressure was growing. Fans didn't know it, but Ron was already wrestling with a career-changing question. How long should I keep playing a role that no longer belongs to me? He wanted to direct, but every year he stayed on Happy Days was another year he wasn't building the career he dreamed of. Even worse, studio executives didn't take him seriously. To them, Ron was the kid from Mayberry and the red-headed sitcom boy, not a filmmaker. They liked him, but they didn't respect what he was trying to become. Then came the moment that pushed everything over the edge. A decision made by the studio that Ron never agreed to, never approved and couldn't accept. It wasn't about screen time. It wasn't about money. It was something personal, something that affected the way he was seen, not just as an actor, but as a person and a professional. And when it happened, he knew immediately that he couldn't stay. The cast didn't understand the silence. The audience didn't understand his sudden exit. But Ron understood one thing clearly. If he stayed, he would lose the future he had been working toward since childhood. The walkout wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting match, no scandal, no emotional on-set spotlight moment. Ron simply finished what he needed to finish, and then, without fanfare, he left. The door closed behind him, and the studio expected he would eventually return. But he didn't. He never came back as a cast member, not even in later seasons, not even for the grand finale the network begged him to be part of. Whatever happened behind that door, whatever line was crossed, it was final. And only a few people on that set knew the truth. What most viewers didn't see was the growing imbalance behind the scenes, an imbalance that pushed Ron Howard into a corner he never expected to be in. When Happy Days first began, Ron was the central character. Every script revolved around Richie Cunningham's life, his friendships, his family, and his coming-of-age story. But by the third season, something had dramatically changed. Fonzie, originally meant to be a side character, had become the face of the show. Ratings skyrocketed every time Henry Winkler appeared on screen. Studio executives pushed for more Fonzie moments, more catchphrases, more spotlight, and gradually, less Richie. Ron wasn't angry at Henry. The two got along well and respected each other deeply. His frustration wasn't with the success of the character. It was with how the studio handled it. Meetings that once included Ron were suddenly happening without him. Scripts were rewritten without asking for his input. Storylines that originally centered around Richie were handed to Fonzie. His character wasn't evolving, he was shrinking. And the worst part wasn't the lack of attention. It was the lack of honesty. No one ever said, "We're phasing you out." They just did it quietly, week after week, hoping he wouldn't notice. But he did. And so did the director in him. He wasn't just acting. He was watching the creative decisions shift from storytelling to marketing. The show was becoming a business machine, not a character-driven comedy. And deep inside, Ron understood something painful. As long as he stayed, he would be treated like an actor who was lucky to have a job, not a creator with a future. Hollywood didn't see the director he wanted to be, only the kid they had already labeled. Then came the breaking point, the moment that sealed everything. The studio made a decision about Ron's character without telling him first. They wanted Richie to stay on the show, but not full-time. They planned to keep his name in the opening credits, use his face for promotion, and still call him a main character, but give him only a handful of appearances each season. In other words, they wanted the benefit of Ron Howard's name, without giving Ron Howard a real place in the show. He was being reduced to a background figure whose value was in branding, not talent. And that was the moment Ron knew he was done. Not because of ego, not because he wanted more fame, but because he refused to let a studio decide what he was worth. He had worked for years to prove he wasn't just a sitcom actor, and they were about to turn him into a mascot. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply told them he was leaving, and when they tried to negotiate, he didn't bend. The door had already closed in his mind long before he physically walked off the set. The cast was stunned. Some thought he'd return after he cooled off. Others assumed the network would give him a better offer. But Ron wasn't bluffing. The day he left Happy Days was the day he stopped being Richie Cunningham and started being Ron Howard, director, storyteller, and independent creative force. The studio thought they were losing an actor. They didn't realize they were losing one of the most successful filmmakers of the next 4 decades, and the world didn't understand the full truth until much later, long after Ron had moved on, long after Happy Days ended, long after the studio realized the star they pushed aside had become far bigger than the show they once controlled. But what happened next, what Ron did after leaving, proved that his decision wasn't a mistake. It was the moment his real career finally began. The world thought Ron Howard disappeared after Happy Days. But the truth is, he didn't walk away from Hollywood. He simply walked away from the version of Hollywood that refused to take him seriously. The very day he left the sitcom set, he didn't go home to rest, rethink, or regret. He went straight to work on the one dream the studio had never believed in: directing. Most actors who leave a hit series struggle to stay relevant. But Ron wasn't trying to stay visible. He was trying to build something deeper than fame. And while the industry still saw him as the kid with the innocent smile, Ron was already hiring crews, studying lenses, writing scripts, and preparing for a future no one else could see but him. His first projects didn't have the massive budgets, star-packed casts, or studio backing that sitcom stars normally expect. He didn't demand recognition, he earned it. Every film he directed became a lesson, every setback became fuel, every doubt from others made him work harder. And then something happened that changed everything. One of his early movies succeeded, not because of his past as a sitcom actor, but because of his skill behind the camera. The same networks that once dismissed him suddenly wanted meetings. The same people who ignored his ideas now claimed they always believed in him. But Ron never forgot who tried to stop him and who didn't. Meanwhile, the cast and crew of Happy Days began to feel the impact of his absence. The show was still popular, but something was missing. Richie Cunningham wasn't just a character. He was the emotional balance of the series. Without him, the show leaned harder into punchlines, catchphrases, and exaggerated personality. The chemistry that once felt effortless now felt forced. Audiences noticed. Critics noticed. Even the cast noticed. What had once been a show about friendship, family, and growing up had turned into a show carried by a single character. And that was never the original plan. And behind closed doors, the studio quietly admitted what they would never say publicly. Happy Days had lost more than an actor. It had lost its anchor. It had lost the one presence that made the story feel real, grounded, believable. And the moment Ron started receiving awards, praise, and respect as a director, the industry saw the truth. The kid they pushed aside had become bigger than the show he left behind. But the most painful twist wasn't in the ratings or the writing. It came years later when the show reunited for anniversaries, interviews, and nostalgic specials. The cast would sit together, laughing about the old days, sharing memories and behind-the-scenes stories. And there was always one chair missing. Ron showed up only when he chose to, never out of obligation, never out of guilt, only out of respect for the people he cared about, not the system that tried to define him. Fans always wondered, why didn't he return for the final season? Why didn't he do one last episode? Why didn't he come back for the big farewell the network begged him for? The answer was simple, because the story had already ended for him. The moment he walked away, he didn't just leave a character. He left a version of himself he could never go back to, and yet, despite everything, Ron never spoke with bitterness. He never blamed people publicly. He never exposed the behind-the-scenes disrespect that pushed him out. He didn't need to. His success did the talking for him. Every film he directed, every award he received, every project that proved his vision. That was the answer to anyone who ever thought he left Happy Days because he was afraid of losing relevance. The truth was the opposite. He left because he was ready to grow, and nothing, not even fame, was going to keep him small. Ron Howard's decision to leave Happy Days wasn't just a career move. It became a turning point in television history, a quiet reminder that even in Hollywood there are moments when walking away is the most powerful thing a person can do. And as the years passed, something remarkable happened. The industry that once typecast him as a teenage sitcom actor began introducing him with a different title, Academy Award-winning director. The man who left a hit show at the height of its success went on to create films that defined generations: Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, Backdraft, Cocoon, Cinderella Man, Willow, The Da Vinci Code, Rush, and many more. While others chased fame, Ron built legacy. While others clung to the spotlight, he mastered the camera behind it. But here's the part few people know. Even after all the awards, success, and recognition, Ron never regretted starting his career as Richie Cunningham. He never looked down on sitcoms, never spoke poorly of his time on the show, and always credited Happy Days for giving him the experience he needed to understand storytelling from the inside. What he resented wasn't the role. It was the moment the studio tried to control the direction of his life. And in interviews, when asked if walking away was difficult, Ron always answered the same way. It was necessary. Even more surprising is what happened between Ron and Henry Winkler, the man whose rising popularity shifted the show's direction. Instead of bitterness, the two built a lifelong friendship, one based on respect, not competition. Henry became one of the first people to publicly support Ron's directing career, calling him a genius long before Hollywood noticed. Years later, when Henry finally won his first Emmy, Ron was one of the first to send him a personal message. Their friendship proved something the media never understood. Ron didn't leave because someone else became successful. He left because he refused to let success trap him. Meanwhile, the studio that once assumed Happy Days could survive without Ron learned a painful lesson. Ratings slipped. Storylines grew repetitive. Viewers noticed the emotional emptiness the show never recovered from. And when the finale aired, the network still hoped Ron would return for a final goodbye. He didn't. Not out of anger, but because the story that once belonged to him now felt like someone else's memory. And here's the final twist. The very thing the studio once rejected. Ron's dream of becoming a director became the reason they later wanted him back. Decades after he walked away, networks that ignored him were now begging him to direct new series, produce new projects, and bring his creative mind back to television. Ron didn't need revenge. His success was the answer. The truth is simple. Ron Howard didn't leave because he was tired of acting. He left because he believed in his future more than the world around him did. And when the moment came to choose, comfort or purpose, fame or growth, he chose the one path most people are afraid to take. And that is why his exit from Happy Days is still talked about. Not because of drama, but because of courage. The courage to walk away from something millions of people would have stayed trapped in forever. The courage to say, my story is bigger than this. The courage to let go and rise higher. Ron Howard's departure wasn't the fall of a career. It was the beginning of one of Hollywood's greatest transformations. The moment an actor became an artist, and a sitcom star became a storyteller for the world.